Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. When I began serving a church in a beach community, I quickly learned of one church member who was living in a long-term care facility. I didn't know, and no one I found at the church knew, what her condition was. Was she bedridden or active, for example? So I paid a visit to find her. She was active and visiting with others in a garden gazebo by the Intercoastal Waterway, so I greeted her, introduced myself, and told her I would come back to see her. Sure enough, in about a month I did, and then in subsequent months as well. Finally, after many months, she one day asked me, "Pastor, why are you here?" Puzzled, I explained again that I was her pastor and she was a valued member of the church. That's when she told me the story of her faithful attendance at worship, and then her health prevented her from driving the 12 miles to the church. And in the time ever since, no one had ever come to see her. After 2 more monthly visits, she asked me not to come back. She was moving nearer her children, but also my visits brought up that memory for her every time. "It's just too painful," she said. I learned a couple of things then. One, that sometimes people get ground up in the workings of the church. And two, how important community is. This week we are looking at a few chapters in the book of Acts and looking at stories you know and don't know and highlighting their significance. Yesterday we talked about the Jerusalem Council and how God's love is extended to everyone, and especially how God's love is extended to everyone whether we like it or not. Today we want to consider one small story that speaks of community and unity at first broken, and then another that tells the extent gone to in order to keep and build community. So first, community broken. I have told you more than once before that one of my favorite characters in the Bible is Barnabas. His name means son of encouragement, and this story reflects just that. Earlier in Acts, we have the story of Paul deciding to go on a mission trip to tell others about Jesus. He needs a partner or two, and Barnabas agrees to go, and they take along a young man named John Mark. The thing is, in that first place they stopped, for some reason, John Mark had a change of mind and wanted to go home. Later, when this part of Acts rolls around, Paul is ready to go on his second mission trip with Barnabas, and John Mark wants to go along again. Paul, however, refuses to let him tag along, fearing that John Mark will quit again. Barnabas argues for John Mark to be included, but Paul is adamantly against it, and the argument grows so heated that Paul and Barnabas split, ending their partnership. Their sense of community is broken. Barnabas then teams with John Mark, encouraging him. And by the way, many believe that later John Mark wrote the Gospel of Mark. And Paul then teams up with Silas. Nevertheless, their community, their unity was broken, and it was hurtful. The second story is quite confusing and surprising. Yesterday we talked about the Jerusalem Council, and I mentioned that Paul had a trick up his sleeve. Remember that the council was called to determine if the mission to offer the gospel to Gentiles directly was valid. Well, when Paul attended, he took a young man named Titus with him. They gathered, worshiped together, ate together, all kinds of things. And when they came to decide the issue, Paul pointed out that Titus was an uncircumcised Gentile Christian, and they had accepted him and not noticed any difference. Titus was the example that helped pave the way for the understanding of God's grace, open and available to all. Then, in the very next chapter, after that was decided, Paul went to spread the gospel to a place named Lystra, and in Lystra was a strong community of Jews who had come to believe in Jesus. They were Christians, but Jewish by heritage. One of the believers was a man named Timothy, and his mother had been Jewish, but his father was a Greek Gentile. So Timothy was uncircumcised. In other words, a Gentile by heritage. Acts 16:3 tells us that Paul had Timothy circumcised. What? He's just come from a conference where it was decided that Gentiles didn't have to be circumcised to be part of the community, and then Paul goes out and makes Timothy do it? The following verses even tell how Paul was going around telling everyone the results of the Jerusalem Council and how everyone was happy to hear the news. So why did Paul have Timothy circumcised? The answer seems to be that Paul sensed that, for that community, Timothy remaining uncircumcised would cause division in their community. Such division would cause pain and hurt and prevent the gospel from being received. So Paul does what he can to prevent such pain and division. No, Timothy didn't have to be circumcised in order to be a Christian. Yes, for the good of the community, he did. That's how important Paul thought the community of believers was. Part of our faith is our faith together. Some kinds of churches emphasize one's personal relationship with Jesus, and I guess that's important in some ways. But equally important, and often overlooked, is our relationship with Jesus. The community of faith is vital for faith to live and grow among us. So once again, we come to our own world so racked with division, especially right now. Somehow in our world today, it's harder to find that community, that sense of unity together. In fact, if you take the word community, you have a prefix, com, meaning with, followed by the word unity. As we gather with unity. That doesn't mean that we all agree on everything. It does mean we recognize Jesus in each other. It does mean we know and share God's love. It does mean we see value in each other and live in love. That woman at the beach knew and understood the value of community. May we come together with unity and love. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.